So, if you're watching this video, that probably means you are reading Boghost right now, and my condolences, his paper can be very, very confusing. And specifically his paper on procedural rhetoric, where that's a big term that you'll use a lot in game studies, and it's nice to have it broken down a bit. But let's start with Boghost's description of this, where he states that procedural rhetoric is the practice of using processes persuasively. More specifically, procedural rhetoric is the practice of persuading through processes in general and computational processes in particular. Procedural rhetoric is useful for both the programmer and the user, the game designer and the player. Procedural rhetoric is the technique for making arguments with computational systems and for unpacking computational arguments others have created. Procedural rhetoric itself requires inscription in a medium that actually enacts process rather than merely describes them. Human behavior is a mode of procedural inscription. Now, that was a lot of big and confusing terminology. Don't worry, I completely understand how you feel right now. Let's start with describing procedural rhetoric in simpler terms. Procedural rhetoric is a means where the game developer uses game mechanics and systems as a means of expressing a message to the audience. That seems a lot more manageable to deal with. A lot more understandable. We can understand this more by using an example. For example, the game that I'm currently playing, Animal Crossing, which is an example that Boghost uses in his original paper talking about procedural rhetoric, and it's an excellent example. When looking at games like Animal Crossing on the surface, they do seem like nothing other than nice, comforting games to play. However, looking into the game's history and how it was developed, we can see how the developers used the interactive systems to convey the message with the audience. The purpose of the game was to relate to the co-creator's experience of moving to a new place, anxious and alone, and having to meet a whole new community, make new friends, and continue on with life even though you feel alone at first. This is reflected through gameplay. You start off moving to a new town, nobody knows you, and they aren't obliged to immediately be your friend. So the goal is to play every day, continue growing your relationship with the villagers in your town. Villagers can unexpectedly move away, just like neighbors move away in real life, and there's nothing the player can really do. Personally, it's not only the community aspect that relates to Boghost's thesis here, but also the heavy theme of capitalism that relates directly to how the world is. It was possibly more as a teaching tool for young kids, but it's also a very smart connection to reality, as we see the player having to work off debts, having to, catch bugs and fish to sell to get money and disposable income. In conclusion, procedural rhetoric is the practice in which a game developer utilizes the systematic and gameplay mechanics of a game to connect to the real world, or an overarching theme throughout the game. Hopefully, this gives you a bit of a clearer understanding on the concept. I wish you luck with your further studies. Have a good one.